Nintendo, one of the most nostalgic-filled companies that have so many of the best and some of the most unique ways to experience video games. Sometimes. The Virtual Boy. Another word for embarrassment.
When it comes to the Virtual Boy, I have always wanted to try one of these out, or own one possibly, since I started game collecting nearly 15 years ago. The problem is the Virtual Boy has always been expensive or just not worth enough to really get into. Of course you can emulate this kind of stuff, but I always found it cooler to play stuff on the original hardware and how it was supposed to be played originally. I was sent this collection by a fan of the channel, and so I deeply appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Without this, I would have possibly never been able to experience this or make a video on it, so I am very grateful.
Anyways, the Virtual Boy, one of Nintendo's biggest laughingstocks when it comes to sales numbers. Over 770,000 units were sold. To put that into perspective, console add-ons like the Sega CD or 32X or Nintendo's own Famicom Disk System, which only released in Japan, outsold this monstrosity of chicken legs. So why? Why specifically did this console, compared to others, flop? So let's take a step back and see why. To really understand the Virtual Boy, we need to get into Nintendo's mindset before all this. Nintendo was on top of the world in the 80s and the 90s, having sold an impressive amount of NES consoles, portable Game Boys, and Super Nintendos. Mario was now more popular than ever with an upcoming live-action movie. They had successfully beaten Sega at the 16-bit console wars with impressive 3D games such as Star Fox and Donkey Kong Country. And Nintendo had always been innovating, even when it came to 3D stuff. They had always been into the 3D gimmick for longer than you might think, starting all the way back on the Famicom, the Japanese NES. This is the Famicom 3D system. It was used to play 3D stereoscopic games, but it was a commercial flop, only having 7 compatible games released for the device. Other companies were trying to get their hand into the 3D market. I mean, Sega even tried to dip their hand into it with their own virtual reality headset announced in 1991, but it never made it to market. The only headset that truly made it into some people's hands was the Virtuality. This was released and was sort of an attraction in arcades and theme parks where guests could pay a sum and experience virtual reality. Sort of similar to the stuff you see nowadays in malls and at Dave & Buster's. The headsets were bulky looking, and while producing a VR experience, people complained about the resolution mostly, and because of how expensive it was, the company went bankrupt in 1997. Atari even announced a virtual reality headset in response to the Virtual Boy for their own Atari Jaguar, but plans were quickly scrapped and abandoned as well. That's mostly what would happen with virtual reality in the early days. A company might announce their foot in the door with one, only to backpedal after they see how the cost of doing so. So now we come to this. How does a company that was at their peak turn out a product that sells less than 1 million units?
Well, let's see.
Despite being called the Virtual Boy, this is not a virtual reality headset. This utilizes and displays stereoscopic 3D. The designer of the Virtual Boy, Gunpei Yokoi, was one of Nintendo's finest in the early days, and he was a huge part in the success of games and consoles. He was the person who thought of the 2-player idea for Mario Bros. He produced titles such as Kid Icarus, Duck Hunt, Tetris, Metroid, and Wrecking Crew. He designed Rob the Robot and created the Game & Watch line for Nintendo, and as well as the original Game Boy. Gunpei Yokoi was a genius, and his games and designs can still be seen to this day. The Virtual Boy was one of his last designs before he sadly left Nintendo in 1996 after the Virtual Boy's failure, and then a year later on October 4th, 1997, he died after being hit by a car. The development and lead up to the Virtual Boy is pretty interesting. Not only was it rushed out the door, but it was surprisingly received to a very poor reception. To start with, there was this tech being developed that was a red LED eyepiece display. The company only had a prototype developed, but they took this to about every company to see if they could license it out for them. But almost everyone refused it due to the colors and concerns about motion sickness. And then there's Nintendo and Gunpei Yokoi. They took it upon themselves to make a game console out of this. When it came to the lead-up and announcement of the Virtual Boy, it was kinda weird. Nintendo never made it out that this was the Game Boy's successor and that you had to buy this or you'll be missing out. It never felt like there was this giant lead up or hype, if that makes sense. If there was, it was very small. Even when Nintendo first showed off the system at trade shows, people were complaining about headaches, the red and black color scheme, and how you even played the system. It was obvious that it needed more time in the oven, but Nintendo pushed it to have it be released so that they could have something on the market, and then they could have all hands on deck for their brand new Nintendo 64 console. The Virtual Boy, it was marketed in a weird way. Nintendo was going through their edgy phase at this, and all their commercials were like this monster movie with the Virtual Boy looking for victims. I think the only bad thing is that the console, you need to play it to experience it. It wasn't like the Game Boy where it's like, oh, Mario on the go. The Virtual Boy, it launched on July 21st in Japan and August 14, 1995 in North America for a high price of $180. That's about $360 today. It wasn't cheap, which was usually the appealing thing about Nintendo. Only 14 games were made for the system in North America and only 19 in Japan.
Say what you want about the actual console itself, but who knows? Maybe with a better lineup of games and better support from third party, the Virtual Boy could have done a lot better.
In the end, the Virtual Boy was very poorly received by practically everyone, and by the next year, stores were selling them at practically nothing. Today, the Virtual Boy, it's still thrown into the history of Nintendo, and it's acknowledged still to this day, through little ways such as Tomodachi Life, Super Smash Bros., or even the new Luigi's Mansion 3. But it will always remain as Nintendo's worst-selling console of all time. Fans have even taken it upon themselves to have fan games made, ROMs, or fan patches and translations, and you can actually play these on an actual unit. That's pretty cool.
But I guess that begs the question, is it really as bad as everyone makes it out to be?
So let's actually take a look at the console, because compared to a lot of Nintendo's other systems, there's some oddities here. For starters, the way that you power the system on is through the controller. You won't be finding a power indicator on the console like you'd expect. This is also how you plug the console in as well, from the back of the controller. You can power it through two different ways. One is through the battery pack, which uses 6 AA batteries, but you'd be lucky to maybe get 3 hours of battery life. So much for portability. The second was an AC adapter. It was sold separately and is the preferred method, obviously. Why was this marketed as a portable console? As for the rest of the controller, I find it to be very comfortable. I have small and skinny hands, so I can be picky at times when it comes to how a controller feels. And this just fits so nicely in my hands. There's 4 face buttons, an A and a B, as well as a start and select. My only issue with this is that sometimes I have to get out of my game and look down. There really should have been some form of convexity or perhaps some form of bumps to indicate that you were pressing select. Probably the most unique thing about the Virtual Boy is that it has dual D-pads, which makes sense when we're talking about 3D games here. But the bad thing is that only a few of the library actually utilizes that second D-pad. Compared to other D-pads as well, it's a tiny bit different. It feels like it has less draw and it's more sensitive than compared to a Super Nintendo or even an NES controller. I really like the feel of them. Finally though, on the back we have 2 shoulder buttons or triggers which feel really nice and clicky. While the controller definitely isn't perfect, I'd like to think of it as one of the most comfortable I've actually held. The shape of it kind of reminds me of the N64 or the GameCube controller design. Moving over to what's on the console, we have a volume slider here that controls the stereo sound. This thing can get very loud. A headphone jack, controller port, and an extension port which uses nothing. Usually this would be the home for a link cable to link 2 Virtual Boys together for multiplayer play like the Game Boy did. Funny story though, the link cable was never released. The game card slot here is on the bottom back just like all the other Nintendo portable consoles. The only difference is they go in weird. Usually you insert a game card with the front picture facing away from the user, but here it's flipped. Weird. On top of the console we have 2 switches. This is the IPD dial, or the inner pupil distance dial. This is what adjusts the distance for your specific eyes. It's a lot like adjusting binoculars, for example. Above that is the focus slider, which can be used to adjust to give the picture a more sharp or clear picture. If you're having issues with your console, there's a way to check if it has a problem though with the lenses. When starting up a game, press these buttons on the right side of the controller. Left, B, down, A, up. If your Virtual Boy is fine, it'll look exactly like mine. When it comes to the design of the Virtual Boy, it looks a lot like a modern virtual reality headset, but there was never actually a head mount released. There were plans. But the main reason the Virtual Boy was designed with these legs was told by Gunpei Yokoi in an interview with Edge magazine in 1995. He said this: "We also considered the fact that if a woman wearing makeup was to use the head-mounted design, the next person might be hesitant in wearing it. So, we changed the design so that you can just look into the viewing apparatus and still appreciate the 3D experience." I can sort of understand that a little, but at the same time, it is a little weird to take that into consideration as well. So instead, now all you do is you slot on the Virtual Boy and now you're ready to play. This looks unfinished. But if I had to be honest,
No, Zeth, wait!
it's not as bad as people say. When I see this, I think it looks unfinished, yes, but it's not completely unappealing. When I would see one or an image of one, it drew me to want to try to play it. Never where I thought it was too ugly or weird to try it out. So let's do that. I got a stack of games, let's play a handful of the library. One final thing that's a bit weird about the Virtual Boy are the cartridges. Compared to the Game Boys, these are big and thinner. They also have exposed pins, so they all come with this dust cover. Again, it's just weird. All this just feels like I'm using a prototype rather than a fully manufactured and built product. When you actually play a Virtual Boy, it doesn't surround the viewer like you would think with a traditional VR headset. It more so plays it in a box in front of you. Think playing a 3DS in the dark with a red and black screen. That's the Virtual Boy. The 3D works, don't get me wrong, but it does vary from game to game. To start with, Mario's Tennis released on July 21st in Japan and August 14th, 1995 in America. To start with, we're asked a prompt about turning on or off the automatic pause. Yeah, that whole why not go take a break can be linked all the way back to this and Earthbound as well, surprisingly enough. So Mario's Tennis starts with one of those weird dreams you get right before you wake up. There's two options to select: singles or doubles. You select the mode, level, and how long the match is. This is extremely bare bones, even for a tennis game. There's no two-player option, this is a solo romp only. There are 7 characters to choose from: Mario, Luigi, Princess Toadstool, Yoshi, Toad, Koopa, and Donkey Kong Jr. While most people say that there's no difference between them all, you have to select the hard difficulty to really notice it. There's speed differences and racket coverage differences. Characters like Mario and Luigi are built almost the same, while someone like Toad and Koopa are fast and slow, but also have bad and great racket coverage. When selecting the doubles option as well, these stats all come into play. But there's really no feeling of difference if I'm being honest. You can select any one of the characters and it just feels like you're playing the exact same person. There's really no difference or advantage if you played Toadstool compared to Donkey Kong Jr. The 3D effect does work though, surprisingly. It helps judge the distance between where it is in comparison to your character. The sprite work here is nice and the characters are nice and big. But what else can I really say though? You can't choose the court, there's only minor differences, and that being the background changes. Ooh. I mean, yeah, sure, if you want to be specific, it's cool that this was the first Mario-labeled sports title, but it definitely feels like it. The music is nice, but nothing super memorable. Mario's Tennis just boils down to it feels like a pack-in game, but it doesn't do a very good job at selling the Virtual Boy. This isn't a Wii Sports moment where it clicks with you. It's just a bare-bones experience that's just tennis. It's okay, I guess, but nothing that I'd be running to tell a friend about.
Dude, you have to try this. It's tennis.
Next up is Red Alarm, released on July 21st in Japan and August 14, 1995 in North America. Developed by T&E Soft, they were one of the only third-party Virtual Boy developers. It's a 3D polygon shooter similar to something like Star Fox, except due to the limitations of the console, they had to opt for this wireframe look. It sort of looks similar to the Vectrix graphics on Atari's Battlezone, except you'd probably have more fun with Battlezone, to be honest. Red Alarm could have been a decent game on Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64. What the main problem is the wireframe design. Yes, on an actual Virtual Boy, it's a bit easier than probably what you're watching. But at times, I still can't determine what is something I can fly through or under or around. And add all the junk on the screen and the words with stuff flying all around you, it's just a frustrating time. If it had a more simple look to the stage, perhaps this could have been good. But half the time, I just don't know what I'm looking at. The logos, the stage, the ship, it all blends together.
The music is just awful in my opinion, and it makes me want to turn the system down. It's just a garbled mess of chiptunes and sound effects. Red Alarm overall is nothing unplayable, but there's nothing drawing me to want to play it again. It's unimaginative, boring, and it overall just makes my eyes feel like they've been waterboarded. Galactic Pinball released on July 21st in Japan and August 14, 1995 in North America. When it comes to pinball, I have always been fascinated by how they work and the history behind the machines. Not so much with digital pinball games. Galactic Pinball feels like a glorified port of the 3D Pinball Space Cadet game on Windows. Sad to say, it's just pinball. No false marketing here. You can either use the D-pads or the back bumpers to move your paddles. I gotta say here, the back paddles, they feel nice to use. It sort of feels like I'm using an actual machine. The bad thing here is the physics. They can be a bit wonky. It doesn't feel great. Even something like Pinbot or Pinball on the NES feel leagues better than this. There's only 4 boards to choose from, and they all feel very similar. Each of them have a little gimmick though if you knock a ball in the right area. One has you shooting asteroids, another defeating an alien, or playing as Samus' ship from Metroid. The 3D effect here isn't very appealing and doesn't work all too well. This is another one where I want to rub my eyes after a few minutes of playtime. The music here is actually okay though. Galactic Pinball is just kind of a waste of time here. It's not impressive or appealing enough to really want to go back to. Virtual League Baseball, developed by Kemco and released on August 11 in Japan and September 11, 1995 in North America. I think that this is a good time to bring up that the Virtual Boy is actually region-free. So here I have the Japanese version of this game, and it works just fine on a North American system.
This game is horrible!
There's really no difference between the two, only that with the Japanese version the characters are cartoony, while here we have in North America we got more realistic players. The graphics here are nice and appealing actually, with the 3D working surprisingly well for this title. The music when the game is loading too is very nice. The bad thing is, it all comes down to the gameplay. Everything is off. When you swing a bat, I never can seem to hit it properly. When you're pitching, the opponent can always get a hit, and if a ball gets sent to the outfield, your players are just way too slow. By the time you grab a ball, the player has already gone home. Overall, Virtual League Baseball is a lot like other games on the Virtual Boy. Forgettable. Nestor's Funky Bowling, released in February 1996. This was only made available in North America, and it was the second to last Virtual Boy game released here. Nestor's Funky Bowling is a game that makes me question life. Out of all the games on this list, this feels the most bare bones. Imagine paying $40 for this. All it is, it's bowling without any funk to it. You can get through a game in less than 2 minutes, and then it's game over. You can choose between Nestor and his sister Hester, but there's really no differences here. And all you do is line up the bowler, press A, over and over and over again. The 3D effect here works, but there's nothing really noteworthy or special about it. There's no power-ups, different lanes, or items. It's just bowling. Nestor's Funky Bowling. More like Nestor's Fictitious No-Nonsense Bowling. Golf, or T&E Virtual Golf, released on August 11 in Japan and in North America in 1995. I actually think that this game looks impressive, and could have passed for an early PS1 title if it wasn't for the colors. There are problems though with the game, and one stems from the 3D effect. While it works for the most part compared to other titles, I feel like every so often I'm looking cross-eyed. Sometimes when trying to tee up and look at what's in the foreground, my eyes can't focus on that and they shift to what's behind it. Another thing is that this at the time was meant to be the brand new cutting-edge video game system that was technically more powerful than a Super Nintendo in some ways, and in this game, there's only 18 holes. That's the same amount as Golf on the NES. Golf on the Game Boy had double the amount. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it's definitely not impressive, and not something that would make someone go, "Oh, I need to go out and buy a Virtual Boy." For golf.
Golf.
And so far, that's been the way with all the titles I've played so far. Some are fun maybe for 10 or so minutes, but not something that you would want to go out and have to buy this console to play this game. One more game to try out from the stack, a palate cleanser for sure. Virtual Boy Wario Land, released on November 27 in Japan and December 1st, 1995 in North America. When it comes to Wario games, I'm a massive fan of the greedy little guy. One of my favorite games of all time is Wario World on the GameCube. I mostly played all the previous titles on the 3DS Virtual Console, But this one has always escaped me because I've always wanted to play it on an actual unit, no emulation. Technically too, what's funny is that this is Wario Land 2, as it came out before the actual Wario Land 2. While Wario Land 2 shook up the franchise and turned it less into a Mario spin-off series and more into its own thing, Virtual Boy Wario Land is more in line with its predecessor. There's floating blocks and Wario can actually die. This is a good game. No, a great game. First and foremost, it's a Wario Land game. Get to the exit and collect as much treasure as you can along the way. Some things to note are that you actually use the back bumper to run, and then B for the action of your side bump. This is by far the best and most impressive Virtual Boy game, that while the 3D isn't necessary, it's still really cool. It's sort of in the same sense as those 3D classics that Sega came out with or Kirby's 3D Adventure. Wario's model has dimension to him as well as the world around him. You're able to hop between the stage at points in the background, and sometimes enemies even pop out at you or in your face. This overall is a game. The other games that I've discussed feel more like quick bite-sized experiences, and while Wario Land can be beaten pretty quickly, there's only about 14 stages, the game still feels fully fleshed out and polished. It doesn't feel like some demo that was fully packaged and shipped. I love this game, and I think that if you have to get a Virtual Boy or want to experience some of the games, this is the one game I personally recommend and enjoyed the most. I understand I'm missing some of the more key titles like Mario Clash, Jack Bros, and Telro Boxer, but if I don't have them, I can't review them fully. Maybe in the future we can come back and do more in-depth reviews or have some of the titles I'm missing. But for now, I'm very grateful that I was able to experience this console. This is something that I've wanted to try for a long time and I just couldn't get my hands on. I don't think the Virtual Boy is as bad as people say it is. Sure, it's an unfinished and rushed product that hardly has any appealing or worthwhile games, but it's still kinda cool. This was one of the first virtual reality headsets to be sold and marketed. As a video game collector, this is my holy grail item of my collection now. But that's basically all that it's good for. Collectors. Honestly, if you're wanting to try out a few of the games, emulation is nothing to be ashamed of here. Wario Land is the only one that I'd say is even worth your time doing that.
Overall, the Virtual Boy is a weird mark on Nintendo's history, and its failures can be linked to multiple different issues. This is not the worst thing in the world, by far, and there are very impressive things about it, but overall, it definitely could have used a few more years in the oven if Nintendo really wanted to go all in with this product.